We're back on Inside Politics. Our guest today, Keel Hunt, longtime Nashville journalist and author. He's written a book now on the Ingram family business, focusing on Ingram Content, which now is the largest book wholesaler and many of the largest things throughout the book industry. Keel, Bronson Ingram, when he bought the business, didn't know a whole lot about the book industry, but he hired people who did. He also had many key employees he brought in who maybe brought new ideas to it. That seems to be one of the highlights or the hallmarks of this company over 50 years. They've had people come in with innovative ideas.
Yes, Bronson didn't know much about the book industry, the book trade, but he was a quick study. And what you say is true, and is true to this day. To surround the business and its operation with very competent individuals, and this indeed happened with what became Ingram Book Company. Some of the early characters. In addition to the two we talked about, Mr. Harry Hoffman was the first president of Ingram Book Company, and he's the one that really began the expansion in service to retail booksellers, bookstores, and that's such an important part of that industry right now, of course. And Keel,
in that regard, one of the big technological problems one of the big things that Ingram did with this was they had to first get people's attention. Most people had never heard of Ingram. It was a little 18-employee company that was down here in Tennessee. They had some difficulties at first getting through and get people how they could help them. How'd they overcome that?
Well, how they overcame it was chiefly through shoe leather and determination. Mr. Hoffman, the first president of Ingram Book, together with Michael Ziebert. A lot of people of a certain age will remember Ziebert's bookstore in Hillsborough Village at that time. Mike Ziebert became an early buyer and who went out to publishers and from New York City on around, and sometimes together with Mr. Hoffman, and they just were determined to get themselves known and get Ingram, the company, into that trade.
It seems that the company also had one innovation in terms of technology. The shipping of books and taking orders and things like that was kind of chaotic in those days, and they came up with now what would be old technology, microfiche, but it made a real difference and was quite revolutionary in the business, was it not?
Yes, sir. That was a very important early innovation. What Ingram, looking back from a perspective of 50 years later, what Ingram did, particularly during the 70s and early 80s, was to bring some organization to what had been, as you say, a chaotic kind of business. There were multiple publishers. There were other distributors in other parts of the country. There was no one national distributor as yet. And so they were able to and one of the ways that Mr. Hoffman, who had worked at the 3M company previously, knew about the microfiche technology, and he and Ziebert and other Mr. Tom Clarkson, some early, the early leadership team of Ingram Book, adapted microfiche technology to the book trade, and it gave bookstores a way of having a more reliable source of inventory. It had not been reliable, and of course they had to deal with multiple publishers. Well, Ingram was able to systematize that, would be my word, and that became very important.
Ingram also did things that they would not be considered to be high tech, but they even published newsletters for bookstores so they could see what was coming. That was something that was not much in the industry in those days. They also helped big retail chains like Kmart, who wanted to start their own bookstores within the stores. And Ingram went so far as to actually take over and sort of do a lock and key situation where they basically put the thing in, not using their name, but using the Kmart name, and they put bookstores and Kmart's, I suppose, all over their system.
Yes, sir. Kmart was one. There were many. They would help the booksellers organize their opening inventory and actually get into their own merchandising of books in the stores by showing them, well, that these are best practices, these are the leading titles this month, and so forth. And you mentioned the newsletters. That's a very important detail. They were able to bring a little bit more sense of community, I would say, among very different bookstores, booksellers, and this became a way of really empowering booksellers at that step of the supply chain. And now it's well known. And meanwhile, you had a lot of bookstores that opened in malls, shopping malls around the country. That pretty much passed at some point in the early years of this new century.
In recent years, Ingram Content Group has ridden what's been sort of a financial roller coaster coming from the digital evolution of books. There have been some who've been predicting the end of any kind of brick and mortar bookstores, maybe even the end of libraries. Is that at all likely, or is that kind of far-fetched?
Well, I think at this point it's far-fetched that it would wind up being one or the other. But it was certainly a threat to bookstores and certainly distributors at that time. And Ingram tried many things, and they're recounted in this new book. But I think the lesson, Pat, this is one aspect of the new book that I think is relevant to a lot of family businesses, whatever industry or trade that you're in. And it became the key to it for Ingram became having a long view, taking a long view, having a sense of persistence around ideas. Not every idea worked. Some, most have, but to stick to it, as we would say, and also to become an innovator. Develop new ideas as a important way of remaining relevant.
Keel Hunt's our guest on Inside Politics. He's the author of The Family Business, How the Ingrams Transformed the World of Books. Back to continue our conversation with Keel after you watch these messages.